Hey everyone, my name is Hiram Gonzalez, founder of Hito Homes and a licensed realtor in Canada with Realty. I'm really excited about this sitting with you here today because this is exactly the kind of conversation that can genuinely shift the way you think about building long-term wealth in real estate. Today, we're going to dive into how Canadian real estate investors can grow their portfolios right now. And more important, what programs are available for real estate investors like you that actually make sense. To break all that down, I've brought in today someone who truly knows this space inside and out. Jake Steinman is the founder and CEO of Realty. Jay has a deep expertise in CMAC MLI Select program, which is one of the most powerful financing tools on multifamily investor Canadian real estate today. Under Jay's leadership, Realty has closed over $100 million of transactions in the last couple of years, and his team has helped many investors across Canada build serious portfolios using strategies we're going to unpack right here today. We're going to get into the ins and outs of the MLI Select program. We're going to talk about real numbers and break down exactly what's possible for investors on today's market. Jen, before we start today, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience?
Just thanks for inviting me to chat with you. And just to be clear, it's more like almost $500 million worth of MLI Select. So a lot more than $100 million.
Wow, that's quite impressive.
Thank you.
Let's start today and share with the audience, how do you start in real estate? Tell us a little bit about how you got into Canadian real estate investing.
Great question. So how did I start in real estate? My family has always been involved in real estate. My father and mother were both realtors. They started off before I was even born, and they were focused originally in residential, and then as I grew up they moved into selling commercial real estate, so I just kind of followed in their footsteps. It was the conversations we had around the dinner table.
Okay, well, it's very interesting to know. So that's actually embedded in your blood, and it's probably like a family continuation on the same field. So since you started, the market has gone through a lot of change over the years. How has Canadian real estate shifted from when you started to what it looks today? And what does that mean for investors today?
Sure. I got my real estate license in 2008. I really became active in the industry around 2011. So I saw a lot of things happen all the way back. 2008, we all know, was the great financial crisis in the US, where housing prices dropped 30-35%. There was basically no new home sales. And at the same time, there was a slowdown in the Canadian market. But what we saw after that was fueled by high immigration levels and a strong economic background, that housing prices and investment in primarily Ontario went absolutely bonkers, right? So we saw from like 2010 to 2016 just an incredible run of prices, rents, growth of the Toronto area, growth of Ontario. Slight blip around 2016, 2017, and then obviously as we came into the COVID years, from 2020, 2021, even the beginning of 2022, it was probably you can tell me, the hottest real estate market that ever existed. It was like everyone had to buy a house or they were gonna never get one again, right? And prices were going up by the hour, new construction was selling out by the minute, and for that period of time, it was an absolute frenzy. Investors wanted to buy condos, townhouses, single family, and larger investors were buying every apartment building they could. We were even seeing, for the first time maybe in 20-30 years, real investment in new construction apartment buildings in Ontario, so things were going very strong, right? Starting around 2022, 2023, we started to see those interest rates coming up, and that combined with lower immigration levels led to a stalling of the Ontario housing market. I think we've all seen it. It's pretty obvious out there. Pre-construction sales have dropped to historic lows. We're barely seeing any new sales happening at all. We're in single digit, double digit numbers on a lot of months. A lot of projects that started selling can't get to construction financing, that kind of thing. We've seen resale house prices have come down, 25% across the board, plus minus, in Ontario. and there's rents falling in Ontario as well. So what we've seen is just a major shift over the last 2 or 3 years in Ontario. But you asked across Canada how things are going, and there's other areas of the country that we're now looking at where we've seen a major uptick in real estate. So about the same time that Ontario started to falter, let's say, we've seen incredible growth in Alberta, in both cities in Alberta, in Edmonton and in Calgary.
Wow. And talking about our Alberta, so this is something that it's in the word mouth every day, and it looks like it's one of the hottest market at the moment. So what is about Alberta especially that makes it so compelling compared to Ontario and BC, for example?
Sure, that's a loaded question. There's a lot of factors. So I would agree with you, as I said, that there's been a huge uptick in sales and interest in Alberta. I prefer to avoid saying words like hot market, cold market, because we had a hot market in Ontario. It was at the point of, we can almost look back and say nonsensical, right? And it was like people were buying sight unseen, prices were going up like crazy. It was very hot, but that led to now a lot of this, we've seen kind of pricing falling off a cliff. In Alberta, I wouldn't say it's a hot market. I would say it's a strong market that's based off of the fundamentals. So there's lots of interest in buying there because there's actually economic sense to it. It's not irrational behavior. So why is Alberta getting that interest? I think that the primary factor is cost of living. Ontario, Toronto specifically, BC, Vancouver specifically, it's out of reach. The average Canadian that gets a good job, goes to university, gets a good job, will never be able to afford a house in Toronto or in Vancouver. And that's a very sad thing, right? I don't think that's how it should be, but I can't control what's going on. Whereas in both Calgary and Edmonton, the average salaried person can buy a home. You have housing in Alberta, in Edmonton, starting around $450,000 for a detached house. You have housing in Calgary for a detached home starting around $600,000. If you're making $90,000 a year, that's attainable. If you make $90,000 a year in Toronto, what's a detached house? $1 million plus, most of them 1.5 or up. It's not attainable. You need to be making $250,000 to even start thinking about it. So what's driving at a very fundamental level is people are leaving Toronto, they're leaving Vancouver, they're moving to Alberta because they want to have that Canadian dream, which is still alive and well there.
Very interesting. Let's try to help for someone that might be new into the investment real estate per se. What should they be looking at a single family unit or a multi properties? What's your recommendation and why?
Sure. Every person's situation is of course different, right? So there's no single answer for that question. But in general, I think the root question that someone should be asking is, what is the purpose of this investment, right? I think a lot of people invest money without an actual goal. They just heard you're supposed to invest money. My dad told me to invest money. My brother told me to invest money. But they never think, what is my actual goal? How old am I? How much money do I make? What am I trying to accomplish in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? And while historically, investing in a single family home or a condo in Toronto market has done well because the market ran up so much from like 2015, 2016 till now, and people were just buying and selling, make 50,000 here, make 100,000 there. But that was fueled, I think, a lot, as I said, on just the pressure on upward pricing. Whereas if your real goal is to build long-term sustainable net worth or generational wealth or really change how your life is every day, I think in general, focusing on proper multifamily, as in 5 or more units on a single building, is a better avenue. And the reason is because the actual financing is a lot easier. The price you're going to be paying on a per square foot and a per door basis is going to be lower. So your rents versus your price is going to be better. And that's going to allow you to potentially actually have real cash flow versus focusing on the speculative element of, will this be worth more money tomorrow, right? And as I like to say, is kind of cash flows forever versus appreciation is pure speculation, which is what we're seeing in Toronto. So if your goal is to build replacement income for your day job, which is what I call kind of generational wealth, building money that actually changes your life, lets you go on that extra vacation or buy that cottage, whatever it is you want to do, then I personally think that the right fit as an investment is to get into multifamily. Again, everyone's situation is different, and I could go on about this for days, but to me, there's no reason to buy a single home or a single condo because number one, the scale is too small. Even if you found a house or a condo that's cash flowing, it's going to be such a small amount of money. Is it worth the headache, right? You spend all this time and effort, you find a condo for 300, 400,000, and it makes you like $100 a month. Is it worth the headache? If you're going to do all of that work and own the investment and deal with the property manager and deal with when you have a tenant problem and paying the taxes and filing your taxes every year, don't you want to at least make $1,000 or $2,000 a month where it actually impacts your life, right? $100 a month is not going to change your life. $1,000, $2,000 a month, that starts to be substantial, even if you make 150 or 200 grand a year. So to me, it's a no-brainer to get into multifamily, and generally the bigger size project you can afford without stretching yourself is going to have a better result for you.
Okay. So I hear all the time landlords, in particular in the province of Ontario, having issues sometimes with tenants, and they most of the time have to go through the landlord and tenant board. And there are challenges out there where it comes to the point that the owner of the property might feel like he's not the owner at a certain point. So that is also impacting the benefits that an investor, a considered landlord, could have in the province of Ontario. I've been hearing also a lot of the Alberta advantage. So what are the key points that will benefit an investor who will turn into a landlord in Alberta comparing to Ontario?
Sure, great question as well. From a regulatory perspective, the Residential Tenancy Act in Alberta is what I would call much more balanced than what we have in Ontario. Trying to stay a little politically neutral, Ontario is very left-wing, very favorable of the tenant. And as you said, it's almost like you don't own the property. Number one, in Ontario, the board alone to even get a hearing can be 6 months to 12 months. And then number two, if there's any reason at all, any sob story, anything that they can do, they're going to side with the tenant, despite anything the landlord brings as evidence. They're always going to give the tenant the benefit of the doubt. And we hear stories all the time, as you said, people running up $10, $20, $30, $40,000 of past due rents and damages, which obviously a landlord will have never recover. Alberta has a much more balanced process. Number one, if someone does not pay the rent, they can be evicted in 14 days. And even if they appeal that process, their eviction or their hearing and conclusion will all happen inside of 30 days, 28 days, 4 weeks, right? And unlike Ontario, there's no sob stories, there's no payment plans, there's no let's get you back on track. It's very cut and dry. Did you pay your rent? Did you not pay your rent? If you paid your rent, you can stay. If you didn't pay your rent, you're out the door, right? So that alone provides so much more security for a landlord, because when you look at underwriting a property and looking at the cash flow analysis and everything else, you take the rents and you apply a discount factor for vacancy and bad debt. And depending on the area of the country, that could be anywhere from 1% to 5%, let's say. But that is a gross underestimate if you're factoring in what happens in Ontario. Because imagine if you own 5 units and 1 unit has a non-paying tenant for 12 months. That's 20% bad debt. It's not 5%, it's not 3%, but you'll never see a pro forma or a cash flow analysis that highlights 20% bad debt, right? In Alberta, at most, you're out a month's rent, but you're taking your last month's rent or your security deposit, so you're covered off. So basically, with the regulatory environment there, you're essentially covered off from a non-paying tenant, because even if they appeal and lose, you're inside of a single month, you have that last month's rent on hand, you're covered off, right? And there's so much more I can go into about how the rules are more fair there. I could spend an hour on the topic, so I don't know if you want to hear it all. But
I love to learn, and also we want to, our investors watching us today, learn as much as they can about that. But also, I have heard that in Alberta, comparing to Ontario, there's some of the benefits where a purchaser can benefit from, and it could be related to the land transfer fee or to the taxation for properties. What can you share with us about that?
Yeah, so that's the other side of the coin. Why Alberta works is the actual deliverable cost of a new home is so much lower than Ontario. So a lot of people are not aware that on average, a new home, and when I say new home, I don't mean, it doesn't matter if it's a single family home, condo, rental building, whatever, 30 to 35% of that cost can be taxes and fees. If you think about that, that is an insane amount, right? And it's hidden from the purchaser most of the time. It's just built into the price. So they always say, oh, the builder's making so much money, the builder's so greedy. They don't realize if you pay $1 million, $350,000 was taxes and fees. It's the government who's greedy. The single biggest winner on every new home is the government of Ontario and the municipality of Toronto, right? So what don't we have in Alberta? There's no land transfer tax. In Ontario, if you're in Toronto specifically, there's a double land transfer tax. You pay Ontario government, you pay Toronto government. Number two, there's no development charges. I haven't looked at the recent DC update for 26, but it's $100,000 a door of development charges in Ontario. Think about that, right? $100,000 is going to Chow, Olivia, so that she can rename Dundas Square or paint more streets red. In Alberta, there is no such thing as a development charge. The concept doesn't even exist. And then on top of that, you don't have sales tax in Alberta. Now, you're paid, there's GST, right? 5% federal tax, but Ontario has 8% PST. It's all rolled into HST. Now, on purpose-built rentals, there's currently a rebate, but still, overall in Alberta, there is no sales tax. So if you buy a property that's not eligible for a rebate, you're still paying 8% less. Not to mention that just walking into a store to buy a TV or a new cell phone, you're paying 8% less. You go to a restaurant for dinner, you're paying 8% less. The whole idea behind Alberta is that you earned your money. You should get to keep it, right? On top of that, Alberta has the lowest personal income tax rate in the country, and they have the lowest corporate tax rate in the country. Remember I said at the beginning, cost of living? It's amazing when you don't tax everyone to death that people can enjoy their lives a little bit and afford to invest, right? So the biggest difference is, let's look at like an 8-unit building that's $2 million. A $2 million closing in Ontario might have, if it was a brand new building, might have approximately, let's say development charges, 8 units, say $500,000 of development charges and $50,000 of land transfer tax alone. So you're looking at $400,000 or $500,000 of closing costs. That same closing in Alberta would be about $15,000.
Wow, that's a major change. That's a possibility for investors to get in the game where if we do it here in Ontario, the game is completely different.
There's no game, it's economically unfeasible, right? Because at the end of the day, you're spending money on square footage and then you're gonna rent that square footage. I can't rent out a fee, I can't rent out a tax. So if you're adding $400,000 or $500,000 to an 8-unit project of costs, that's unrecoverable, right? And then when you actually run the numbers, it doesn't work. Whereas in Alberta, the numbers work because there's not these ridiculous fees and taxes on top of everything.
Oh, it's amazing. Jake, let's talk a little bit about interest rates and buying power, accessibility to financing for investors. We saw that in 2025, interest rates are coming down a little bit gradually. However, we've seen now since we started 2026, it's a little bit balanced now. It's more like a steady interest rate. So if that window closes and rates, let's say, is starting to climb, what does that mean for real estate investors in Canada? And how should they be positioning themselves right now?
Sure, that's one complication of investing in real estate is always that we're at the mercy of rates, right? There's nothing that anyone can necessarily do to control the interest rates, of course. World leaders make decisions overseas and suddenly interest rates go up or down and move around. It seems that there was a very rapid recent rise in rates caused by fear over the war in Iran and oil supply and all that. But it also seems like over the last 15 or 20 days that a lot of that is stabilized. We've seen rates come down about 20 basis points and now they've sat around more stable and things work at these numbers. Can I predict that rates will go up or down over the next few months? It's very hard because so much of this is impacted by world news that's outside of anyone's control. I think overall, the Canadian economy is not super strong. We just got told we're entering a technical recession, whatever technical means, it's a recession. But at the same time, we have upward price pressure because of this war. So my guess is that rates stay around where they are for the next 12 months or maybe creep up a little bit short of a deal happening in Iran. Now, how can buyers protect themselves if they're investing in real estate? The expression is always that money is made on the buy, right? You don't make your money on the sell, you make your money on the buy, because if you overpay for something, you have to spend years and years of returns to make up for it. So there's nothing you can do to prevent a rate being higher or lower when you close a deal. It's going to be what it is. What you can do is make sure you're paying a fair price that factors in the movement in rates as a risk factor, right? So what we've been focused on is really making sure that the projects that we're promoting and offering out there are fairly priced, assuming some interest rate risk in today's market. We can't predict everything. If rates went from, right now, let's say a project is around 4.2, 4.3%, if that went up to 7%, everyone's gonna be in trouble. That's just how it is. We saw that in 2023. But if we can reasonably protect the buyer, even if rates go to 4.6, 4.7, and they're closing in the next 12 months, then we've done our job, right? The other interesting thing about commercial investing is that in Canada, we have 5-year and 10-year mortgage bonds, which means you can get 5 and 10-year terms. When you do a personal loan, you can only get a 5-year term as the maximum. You can do smaller if you want, right? So the thing is, if your rate is good, you can lock it in for 10 years. This gives you a lot of security. You sleep well at night, right? Because you're not worried about renewing in 5 years. 10 years from now, it's so far out, you've paid off so much principal, even if rates are higher, you're not worried. Whereas with a 5-year, I'm not saying you're gambling, but you're taking a bet that hopefully rates don't go up a lot in the next 5 years, right? Put that in perspective. We had deals, people were buying CMHC back in 2021, 10-year money was like 2.2%. It's only 2026. They still have 5 more years with that rate because they locked it in for 10 years. They're pretty happy right now, right? No one else is getting 2.2% mortgages at the moment. So that's one of the nice things about commercial financing, and when you're buying an apartment building, is if you can lock in that rate for 10 years, you sleep well at night.
It's fascinating how an investor can take advantage of those insights. So Jay, let's now dive a little bit more into our bread and butter, which is the CMHC MLI Select program. How would you explain this program to someone who has never heard of it and has no real estate experience?
Sure. First off, let's talk about what CMHC is. CMHC, Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, it's a crown corporation, so it's technically independent but owned by the federal government. And their primary focus, they've been around since like the 1960s, is to basically get housing in the hands of Canadians, right? So that's kind of their mission statement at a high level. And most people who have heard of them would know about them from their personal residential lending. That you want to buy your first house, your first condo, they'll go up to 90 or 95% loan for you to buy a house or a condo because you're a young guy and you don't have the down payment, but you can support the mortgage, right? So they will insure a lender to let you have a higher ratio mortgage. What most people don't know is that they also have commercial programs as well, because getting housing in the hand of Canadians means creating rental supply, because not everyone is a buyer, there's renters.
Jay, when we compare MLI Select to conventional mortgage, and I know you already touched a little bit of it, can you break it down for us? What does the difference actually look like in terms of down payment, amortization, and interest rates?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that question, because I think most sort of mom and pop investors or people who might be interested in their first multifamily building probably don't realize off the hop that there's a very big difference between commercial lending, or what I call commercial credit facility, versus a residential personal loan, right? So the first thing is, when you go to RBC or TD or whatever to get a loan on your house, they're looking at you. They want to know how much money you make, how much cost you have every month, right? Your GDS and your TDS ratios. And they have certain parameters they put you in, and they say, yes, you can afford this mortgage, or no, you can't afford this mortgage. And that mortgage is on your credit file. It's tied to you. When you're doing commercial lending, and this is not only CMHC, this is in general, they are looking at the building as the income source, right? So this building now has its own income. Let's say after you add what we call the net operating income, it's all of the rent minus all of the expenses, right? So the building rents $1 million and the expenses are $300,000, you have an income of $700,000, right? They say, based on this $700,000, this building can support a mortgage of this much. So it's no longer on Hiram to pay the mortgage. They don't care about your GDS and your TDS. They care about what the servicing ability of that building is, right? Assuming obviously vacancies and bad debts and all those other things. When that happens, a lot of people don't realize it's actually easier for the average person to get a loan on a 5-plex or a 10-plex or a 20-plex than it is to get a loan on your house. because, you know, whether you make a lot of money or not, they want to know everything about that personal income we discussed, right? And even if you own one house and you get another house, they raise the ratios and all that stuff because everything's on your credit file. It's all tied to your income and your risk profile. But when you're buying a commercial asset, they're looking at this building, can it support this loan, and it's its own little silo. In fact, it doesn't even show on your credit personally. So you could theoretically buy a $20 million building today and tomorrow go apply to buy a house for yourself, and the bank wouldn't even know that you bought the $20 million building. So there's a misconception, big building, big bought money, harder to get approvals. It's actually easier to get those approvals for commercial credit. Now, specifically in terms of how it compares for CMHC versus traditional, I'm going to talk about traditionally financing an apartment building. If you went to RBC or TD, they would typically go 75% loan to value, maybe 80%, and they would typically limit you to a 25-year amortization, maybe in certain situations a 30-year, and you're going to be paying usually government bond plus 2 to 3%. So if the government bond today is at 3.1 and you're at 2% above it, you'd be at 5.1. So you'd be somewhere between 5.1 to 6% interest range. With CMHC MLI Select, depending on how you apply to the program and what your building is, as we said, you can go up to 95% financing, you can go up to 50-year amortization, and you're going to be Canada Mortgage Bond, depending on the size of your project, from around 1.5 to as low as 0.5% above it. Canada Mortgage Bond was at 3.3 today, so if you had a bigger project and you were 0.5% above it, you could be as low as 3.8% interest. Even a smaller project, the smallest, crappiest project might be like 4.7% today. So substantially lower interest, longer payment cycle, and way, way lower deposit. So what does that mean? The same person can buy a whole lot more with a whole lot less. And that is the real beauty of the program, right? Not looking at that single home or that single condo, or even why buy a 5-plex with RBC when I can buy a 10-plex with a CMHC lender. That's kind of where the attractiveness comes from.
It almost sounds like an investor that on today's market will have to put a down payment to buy a single unit. Pretty much for the same amount of money, you can get into perhaps a 5 or a 6-plex, right?
Potentially, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's how the math kind of works, because if you were putting 25% down on one unit and you only have to put 5% down on 5 units, it's about the same number, right? So, I mean, another way to look at it would be like if you're looking at a $500,000 condo, 25% down is $125K. You could be looking at a $2 million apartment building and you only need to put down $100,000 potentially. So you could actually end up owning an 8-unit building plus minus the same deposit as a single condo.
Wow. And this will be very, very interesting for our listeners and viewers out there looking at these opportunities. So Jake, MLI Select scores investors across 3 categories: affordability, accessibility, and energy efficiency. How do investors strategically use those categories to maximize their finances and get the best possible deal?
So basically, there's 2 kind of charts. So we won't dig too into detail here, but if you go on the MLI Select website, it has the grid of how you get your points and what those points do, right? And essentially, you have one chart that adds up your points, and that's your 3 categories. And then you have another chart that says, what if you have 50 points? What if you have 70 points? What if you have 100 points? We typically, in most situations, want to get the full 100 points, because the 100 points gets us the 95%. It gets us the 50-year mortgage. When you get less points, you can only get 45 years or 40 years, that kind of thing, right? So how do we get those 100 points? As you said, there's 3 main categories. There's affordable, there's energy, and there's accessible. Most of the time, if we're looking at Alberta, we're going to be picking primarily from affordable. The reason being is that the way CMHC calculates what's considered an affordable unit is based off the average income in that area. Alberta has the highest average incomes in the country, so it has the highest affordable rent numbers in the country. To put that in perspective, in Edmonton, the affordable rent is $1,662 a month. In Calgary, it's $1,740 per month. Whereas in Toronto, it's $1,300 per month. So Toronto has higher rents than Edmonton or Calgary, but the actual cutoff where you're no longer affordable is lower. So you can imagine if you use affordable points here, it really hurts your cash flow. If you can only rent a unit for $1,300 a month, that should be at, let's say, $2,000, right? Whereas in Edmonton, a lot of the smaller units might only rent on the market for 1,400 or 1,500. We're still under the 1662. So it allows us to basically take advantage of all the points in the program without having any additional costs or penalties on our cash flow. You might say, well, why don't I just do energy, or why don't I just do accessible? Well, if you're building a new building and you want to build more energy efficiency or more accessibility, that costs money. So we obviously want to pick a category that has the least cost to us. Affordable is free if it doesn't hurt your cash flow. In Ontario, you need to do energy or accessible to make it work. There are certain product types and certain areas where we may pick from those other categories, but it's more sitting down and analyzing each individual project and figuring out which one has the lowest cost and gets us the best value.
Wow, Jay, you've given us a really insight of the CMEC Malay Select program, and I hope our viewers and listeners have been taking some notes and getting ready for the next ventures in their life. Let's do something that I think a lot of investors do, and it's when we bring numbers down and show like a real example. So can you walk us through a real deal, like an actual example that you have in your pipeline, so people at home can see what the numbers look like and what kind of returns are realistic? And let's simplify it in terms of like the price of the project, the down payment required, and the cash flow that will bring them to them in the first 3 and 5 years.
Yeah, so first thing I would say is a lot of this stuff is visual. We can walk through an example now, but the best bet would be for anyone who really wants to dig into it is to reach out to you after this and let you walk them through on a Google Meet or meeting up at a coffee shop where you can show them the actual pro formas and walk them through scenarios, because it's like trying to describe a spreadsheet through voice. It's not that easy, right? But it's good for you to meet with these people and walk them through it. But to give you an example, I keep referencing like an 8-plex, right? So typically in Edmonton, area dependent, if you're purchasing an 8-unit brand new build, which is going to be a typical format, is going to be 4 townhouses that are like a 3-bedroom upstairs and a 2-bedroom basement. It's all legal, individually metered, fire separated, everything with the city. You have 8 total units. You have 20 total bedrooms, okay? Depending on the area and the city, you're going to be paying anywhere from around 2 to 2.5 million for that townhouse. We'll use really simple numbers because it's easier to do the math. We'll just say 2 million for now. That would obviously be a less desirable neighborhood versus a more desirable neighborhood. But I also tell people, when it comes to investing, it doesn't matter if the neighborhood's good or bad. It matters if you're paying a fair price for that neighborhood, right? There's lots of bad areas in Toronto where you can make lots of money investing in real estate as long as you don't pay too much. But for the sake of simple numbers, $2 million 8-plex. So your deposit on that is going to be 5%, which is $100,000. And you can assume that your closing costs, even worst case scenario, are around $20,000. So assuming you get your 95% and all that, you theoretically would be in this deal for about $120K all in. There's obviously going to be, you got to pay your lawyer for a corporation and some accounting and whatnot, but plus minus, you're into this deal for $120,000 to end up owning a $2 million asset. Now, on a deal like that, using realistic rent numbers and bank underwriting expenses, and when I say bank underwriting expenses, we're using actuals for property taxes, insurance, stuff like that. And then for numbers that are kind of just line items like repairs and maintenance or replacement reserve for future work on roofs and stuff, those are just indexes that are provided to us by the bank. But when you plug all of those numbers in with realistic, reasonable rents, you might end up with a net operating income. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so when we check a sheet later, we'll see how accurate it is, but a net operating income around, let's say, $120,000 per year. And then after you pay the mortgage, you're going to be left with plus minus about $20,000 cash flow. So you might go, that's it, $20,000 cash flow. But remember, you're only in the deal for $120,000, right? So that means you're making like an 8.5%, 9% return on your investment in actual cash on cash returns, which is almost impossible to do in any other type of program. I mean, if you think about it, if you put your money in the stock market, historically it makes 10%, but that's it. You put in 100,000, next year on average you'll have 110,000. When you're buying real estate, you're making a 10% return. Sorry, it's more than 10%. It's more like 15%. I was wrong on my math there in my head. You put me on the spot, I gotta do it. But you're making about a 15% cash on cash return, and then you're still also paying off the mortgage every month, and you're getting any appreciation that exists in the building. Appreciation, I always say speculative, hard to know, but just between the cash flow and the mortgage payment, you're gonna be above 20% on average, right? And every building's different, and there's local situations, what if you have a vacancy, things like that, but you should be overall making at least about a 20% return on your investment between the cash flow and the mortgage payments that are getting made. So when you think about that, from a small investment of 120,000, 5 years later, you've paid off maybe $50,000 to $70,000 of principal, and you've cash flowed maybe $100,000. So you've made $150,000 on your $120,000 in the door. You've already paid off your deposit, and that's not factoring in a single dollar of the building going up in value. Over 5 years, is the building likely to go up in value? Probably. Can you guarantee it? No, of course not, right? Property markets go up and down. But even if you were conservative and it went up 10% in value over 5 years, which is only 2% a year, then you'd have an additional $200,000 of equity there. So I think a conservative, reasonable assumption is that you put in 120 today, and theoretically in 5 years you could be seeing an upside of like 350 approximately. But again, every deal's different and no one can predict the future, but that's historically the type of things people see and why they love investing in multifamily.
That's awesome. One last question before we wrap up this interview. I'm actually working with a client that it's interested in becoming a real estate investor. He has shared with me that he has $100,000 saved that they want to invest in Canadian real estate. What can I advise my client? Where do they start? What's the first move?
Sure. I mean, the number one thing that anyone should be doing, it doesn't matter if they're trying to buy a single house or a $20 million apartment building, right? Is they should be pre-qualifying with a lender, because there's no point in them spending their time or you spending your time or a builder spending their time if we don't know what their actual purchasing capacity is. And we have plenty of lenders and mortgage brokers and people I'm sure you work with as well that can at least give them kind of a high level what their capacity is. And it's great information to know. It's free, right? Like, it's no one's charging you to find out what you can buy. Whether you buy today or buy 20 years from now or never buy, it's still useful to know what the capabilities are, because there's no point in going shopping if you don't know what your credit card can pay for. That's always my first piece of advice. Obviously, they should learn a little bit about all the different options available to them, but I am a big believer in keeping my time efficient, whether I'm promoting or selling something or whether I'm the buyer of something. There's no point in me looking at projects if I find out I can't afford them, right? So the very first thing they should do is pre-qualify with a lender. It's the same as any type of mortgage application. Pre-qual, you're just putting in basic information, right? What are my assets? What are my liabilities? That sort of thing. And then the lender can get back to you in a day or two and say, you're capable of buying this or that. And at least you know what it is you can do, right? And then you can start asking the real questions about what you should invest in at that point, because money's always going to be the thing that is the number one factor for any investor.
Well, great insights, Jay. I hope our listeners have enjoyed 30 to 45 minutes that we've been able to gather together. I just want to say a genuine thank you for sitting up with here today. The depth of your knowledge, obviously, and insight you brought to this conversation, especially around CMHC and MLI Select, is one of the things that most investors sometimes spend years trying to piece together on their own. For everyone who is tuning in today, we thank you for being here. We hope this gives you a clearer and better picture of what you might expect if you want to get into real estate investment. Whether you're just exploring or ready to move, we'd love to connect and help people to map out what the right path forward should be. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to connecting with you soon.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.